Thank you so much, Justin, for having us here. Again, this is not a fireside chat, rather, this is a beachside chat with none other than the former head of IBM India, Vanitha Narayanan. She's a spectacular tech leader who's had an amazing career. And I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes talking to her about her journey, how to build world-class companies from India, and many other things. So, Vanitha, welcome.
Thank you, MR. And let's be clear, the beach side is just for you. I'm in my home office in Plano, Texas.
That's the beauty of Zoom, right? So I think to get started, Vanitha, I've known you for a long time, looked at your career, starting as a sales rep in the US, going to China to head up a large business unit for IBM, if not all of IBM, and then to be head of all of India. This is an incredible journey for an Indian American immigrant. So can you kind of walk us through this fascinating journey? How did you go to IBM? How did you move up in the organization? How did you go to China? How did you end up going back home to India and then coming back to the US? This is indeed something we all want to know.
Well, I'm trying to make this 3 decades in maybe, a couple of minutes. First of all, I want to say thank you. It's really great to be back on the NASSCOM platform stage. I think it's been about 3.5, almost 4 years since I left India. And so NASSCOM is old, familiar, almost extended family. So, hello to everyone and great to be back. Thank you for having me. So the IBM journey, is either a series of, coincidences or serendipity, whichever you look at it. Joined IBM unexpectedly in St. Louis, Missouri, because the person I happened to be sitting in my microeconomic class in University of Houston happened to join IBM, and she happened to give my resume to her boss in St. Louis. And went there because I thought it would be a great interview experience. That's what my husband told me. He said, hey, it's a great company, good interview experience. So went up for the day to St. Louis and came back with the job. And that gave us a happy problem of either moving from Houston to St. Louis or not. And we fortunately did. And so the first decade of my life was there. And then we moved to Dallas to take on a little more responsibility, running one of our national teams all in the telecom space. And when I was doing that, this was both a national team, and then there was a global solutions organization that I headed. And I had a new general manager, Gary Cohen, who came on board, and he happened to call me on a Friday and said he'd like me to go to China to head our communications sector business. And he said, I'm going to give you a lot of time. You can take the entire weekend and call me back Monday morning. So that was a nice 48 hours of thinking, and did that, frankly, thinking, okay, this will be a great foreign experience, for the books, and we'll go do that, and I'll be back in 2 years, and we kept our home in Plano, and I traveled to China. My husband joined me the subsequent year. But that trip to Asia, which was at that point I thought would last maybe 2.5 years, was a 12-year journey. So from China to India, which had not been part of the plan, but that was my first time when they asked me to go, I guess when I was ready to come back to the US to be part of the telecom business. The chairman decided that he wanted more senior leaders in the markets, especially important growth markets, and India was certainly an important growth market for IBM. And then the next almost decade in India was, wonderful journey, something I couldn't have planned, but being back home in your home country and learning it in a completely different way, because I'd left when I was 21, and being back in the workspace, working there. Seeing the changes that had happened in India over the 2.5 decades was remarkable. So came back again to the US, finally for the final chapter to settle down, and then pick up back with my young family over here now with the grandkids.
Awesome. So tell me something more about China. How does an Indian American executive go to China where you don't speak the language? It's a completely foreign. How did you adapt yourself how did you assimilate into that culture and the IBM system there?
Yeah, so the good part was when you have sort of an IBM platform, that tends to be a common platform across the globe. So that gives you, and I mean, I went to China, it was not to run our domestic China business or any part of the domestic, which would have been actually more challenging. It was part of our Asia Pacific then team, and that was Japan, Korea, Greater China, ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand, and India. So it was actually a fairly significant geography, and learning many cultures. And in many ways, all of the sort of the preconceived notions that you develop about China as an Indian and also as an American, in many ways get blown away, because at least China, and I think China today is a little bit different than China, over a decade ago. This was almost 15 years ago. Very, very open. And we were based out of Shanghai, which is a more international, city where you had the larger Asia Pacific businesses or broader businesses. And I would say it was very eye-opening, very energetic. In fact, at that point, I found more gender diversity in China than I did in places like India and Korea and Japan. Certainly not Korea and Japan, and very open. So obviously, the language is a constraint, but when you're in a fairly senior role, you have team members, and again, your teams in China are very fluent. But I think my learning from that part, MR, was particularly as I traveled to Korea and other places. When we do global roles, from places which are predominantly English speaking, you sometimes confuse, being very articulate in English for getting all the good information. And when you actually are in the geographies and you spend the time, which is more than a Zoom call or a video chat or a conference call, and you're able to give them the time to communicate complex, local realities, the depth of understanding you can get, and sometimes the insights that you get, and more important, the shifts that you see, because even back then, these markets were ahead of markets here in the West in many areas, Korea in mobility, and you miss these waves because you haven't, listened or absorbed it well enough. So it was a very, I think, important part of my own professional development, as both as a professional as well as a leader, in being able to look at each geography, and really at the end of the day, it's about the market and the client.
And how did you get the offer to go back to India? That would have been an incredible offer made by, I guess Ginny was the CEO at that time?
No,
at IBM?
Sam was.
Okay.
I don't know that it was an offer, because I was actually, post-Thanksgiving, I was told that I was going to be coming back to the US to have a significant role in the telecom business, which was my business. And at the Christmas party in Shanghai, the person who headed Asia Pacific said, "Hey, I have some news for you. And guess what? You're not going back to the US, you're going to India." So it was a bit of a, so it wasn't an offer made. It was, "Hey, this is what we'd like you to do." And it took me a little bit of adjusting, because I'd never seen my career in anything other than communications, telecommunications. That's what I saw myself sort of spending the rest. So to move to India in a general management role felt it was kind of a double adjustment. One, moving away from what was my in-depth sort of area that I had built my career on, and second, was not something I anticipated working in the Indian market. So, but I have a family there, and once you sort of wrap your head around it and get there and get comfortable being uncomfortable with all the new things I had to learn about the different parts of the business in India, it just was a remarkable, again, a really remarkable experience.
Oh, that's amazing. And that sets you up for the second half of our discussion, which is going to be about world class, because you've seen the US, you've seen China, you've seen the Indian markets, you've seen all these different markets and geographies. So the theme of this conference is world class coming out of India. So when you look at world class, what do you think? There's so many ways to unpack this. It's product, it's the management team, it's the talent. So can you kind of walk us through how you can become a world-class, say, product or software company coming from India? How do you think about it?
Yeah, the first thing I'd like to sort of comment on is, I think it was about a decade ago, maybe less than a decade ago, when I remember some of the early NASSCOM product council, in fact, some of the 10,000 startup event that we launched in Bangalore, which seemed hugely aspirational because it was a services culture and we had not yet sort of bridged to a product culture. And then some remarkable work done by folks on the NASSCOM Product Council, as well as the broader ecosystem, that the whole product thinking and the nurturing of the startups started, and we've now seen again, and then the aspiration was about growing to become a unicorn, and then about exits. And now in the last few years, we've seen some fantastic exits where some of those aspirations have been met. So clearly there's been a movement which shows tremendous progress. And but when I think about world class in terms of I think it's the right aspiration for India at this point in time. And when we all look at there are good products, there are great products, great experiences. When we think of world class, it's a couple of things. Either somebody anticipated a need that you didn't even know you had, and then once you got it, it's like, how did I live without this? Or it's a problem that's been niggling at us for either business or consumer, whatever the problem is, societal, that we've been either solving suboptimally or not solving at all. And now, whether it's the, set of exponential technologies, it's a business model, you find a way to put it together that you can address it in a way that was never addressed. So that sort of gives you, in my mind, at least a couple of ways that you through complete visionary sort of action, or through extraordinary sort of solving a set of problems, you wind up with a world-class product or service. So that to me is the first part. So it's entirely about solving a customer or a client's problem or a societal problem. And then when I think about world-class companies, it's really about that they are wedded and it's to that product journey, that product or service journey of keeping it, continuing to sort of delight the client or solve the problems. So it's not just a one-act event, it's a continuous improvement and a continuous innovation. And that then sort of is where I think many of our startups sometimes lose their way, is you get started with that first great idea and then land a nice big client, which is fantastic. And then you get so wrapped up delivering for that client that you sort of wander into that client's business problems, which is good to do. But before you know, you're not just a product company, you're a services company. And then the second client takes you in a different journey. And then you've suddenly sort of, lost your way a bit. And so it's really important, in my mind, when I see these great companies, is about having that product management culture and mindset day one. So you know what it is about. It's about being passionate about a certain area. It can be a domain, it can be an industry, whatever it is. And having a vision of where you want to take it. Obviously, the client interactions, the market interactions, critical to keep getting the feedback and incorporating the feedback, but not losing track of that product journey. And then when you think about how do you do these? It's about taking the time to build world-class teams. If you're going to be world-class, it's not enough to be good enough. So you want to find that world-class talent. And I think for us, we have been, I think, fortunate in India in the last couple of decades, where global companies have come to India to look for talent. And I think as we look at this whole product journey, it's equally important, I think, for India and our companies there to look globally for that talent. And we can talk about diversity and things like that, but if you're going to be world-class, you have to look beyond, I think, and you can do it virtually. So it doesn't have to be physical anymore. So to me, it's product, it's idea, product management, and world-class teams. I think at a very basic level, it's those.
Oh, that's terrific. Now let's talk about the other area of business and technology we don't tend to talk that much about is diversity and women in leadership positions. And you're unique in that you've navigated this space. So what kind of advice do you have for women entering the workspace, but also companies looking at diversity to look at women as talent for their world-class businesses?
Yeah, this is one of those things where, particularly now, you've got a lot of companies, or at least in the last decade or so, who look at bringing in diverse populations as checking a box. And if I think you do that, you're missing the whole point of it. Yes, there is it's not about equity. It's about really. It's about equality in many ways, and it's really about not giving up on that world class. So let's think about it. You and I can be, roughly we are both the same generation, in some ways similar experiences, but very different after a point. And if we look at a problem, there'll be some commonalities, but the perspective will be very different. Because I absolutely do not have your background and your location of being in the Valley for so many years, and the perspective and the point of view you bring to things. And I think the challenge we have is we can have brilliant founders, entrepreneurs, larger companies, leadership, but if we are missing that broader experiential diversity. And when you're looking for that experiential diversity or the point of view, because a point of view is important to have. And that point of view needs to be something that your client set and your market relate to. So to gather that, by definition, you're going to have to look broader, because that point of view is going to be part of somebody's, and the context that they have built. So it's, you look at women, and as I said, look at talent outside from India, look at talent across India, look at talent from schools you normally don't hire in, because that's something that we find. Once you develop your initial team from a certain university, you keep going back to the same segment. No, go broader. Even India as a country is very broad. That becomes incredibly important. I think about a decade ago, there were several of us women who were all, suddenly multinational tech CEOs in India. And, the businesses didn't stumble. We had, we each brought different experiences to the table. And so whether it, at that point was HP, Intel, us, Accenture, Cap, many of us. And it took a little longer for the local companies to sort of get there. But again, we are all of Indian origin, all from India. And, it does perfectly well. And the market has done well with, in the past, many women in leading banking in India, which unlike in many other places. And, we've celebrated the new woman CEO at Citi, but India has done that for a very long time. So it's important for both, I think. And then I tell the women when you're given a seat at the table, you're given a seat at the table. And now it's your responsibility to use your voice. There's no point having a seat at the table if you're not going to use your voice at the table. And that, I think, is equally important because every seat at the table is a valuable seat.
So one last question before we leave, and that is, now you've retired from IBM and you've taken some greater roles in industry. You're on the boards of HCL, Renew Power, which was recently an IPO on the US markets, and also more recently Schlumberger, the large oil services company. So what's your advice for young women who are coming up in the organization? How do you want them to view their journey? You know, going back to Vanitha Narayanan 30 years ago and your journey, what advice do you have for people now?
Oh, you know what? The young people today are so much, so well put together. You know, so technology has also, you know, and you can pretty much, you don't need a formal mentor, coach. You know, you can learn a lot online today, and that's a huge advantage. And just knowing what you don't know is a huge part of the learning process, because I think at least for me, I didn't know what I didn't know. And it was, you know, sort of later, you just sort of find it as you go along. And for anybody that says, you know, how did you plan your career? No, it was not a plan. It was just a series of, you know, I said at some point in time, you know, it went from desperation to inspiration, but I don't know exactly where that transition happened. But I think there are a couple of things that I would say. One, excel at whatever you do, you know, even if it's not something that you plan to do. Don't be half-hearted about it. You know, it's, you know, and this is not a male or a female thing, it's for anybody. Because if you think you're too good for what you're doing, then you should be too good at how you're doing it. So we don't always get to choose what we do, but it's entirely up to us how we do it. That's always been sort of one of mine, because my very first job was not at IBM, it was selling towels at Josky's in Houston. So it was, you know, and that same mindset. It's, you know, that's the way you're going to do it. Second, it's really about, you know, in the context of business, particularly because I know this was a theme last year for the Product Council, was about ecosystems. And ecosystems are both business ecosystems when you want to be world class, because you want to find like-minded companies. But it's also, as you are, and we talk about networks of people, find like-minded people who want to excel, and it's your ecosystem, and both at a familiar level as well as at a professional level that you can build upon, because that becomes incredibly important, both in terms of covering your blind spots as well as broadening your aperture. And I think that's true for individuals and companies, and particularly when you're an entrepreneur. And third is, I think it's incredibly important to always be a little paranoid and somewhat humble, but that doesn't mean you're not confident. Be confident in the areas that you know you should be confident in, and be paranoid about, you know, what you don't know, and sort of keep that humility so you don't, you know, stop getting the information and learning that you would. Those, I think, are some of the things that I implicitly followed along the way, but I'm very, very impressed with the young people of today and how well they're able to navigate and put together their own career plans.
Awesome, Vanitha. That was a fascinating, you know, 20 minutes of walking through how you went over 30 years, your journey at IBM, how to build world-class companies, and also some great advice for young people. Thank you so much, and we will catch up soon. Thank you.
Thank you, MR.